Hello, and a very warm welcome to this afternoon's, our second day's keynote speaker. Before I hand you over to our co-chair, Matt, to introduce our speaker, there's just a few housekeeping announcements. Now, we might not be in a physical venue, but there are still things that we all need to be aware of. First of all, recordings from this and other sessions will be available in the interactive program and continue to be available afterwards. Also, we want to make sure that everyone can enjoy the conference safely. So please familiarize yourself with our netiquette and code of conduct. Many people help make this conference happen, not least of all of our sponsors and partners, and I do want to acknowledge their support both for this event and as ALT member organizations helping us support our work throughout the year. And a particular big thank you to our headline sponsors, Canvas LMS by Instructure. I hope if you joined them for this afternoon's networking session that you had a lot of fun with them. Now, following this keynote is our special and very first conference gala online. Join us for the launch of the Future of Learning, chaired by our chair, Helen O'Sullivan, at tonight's conference gala, starting at 5:10. So don't be late and bring your own drinks. Now, on that note, I'm going to invite our co-chair, Matt Lingard, onto the stage. Hi, Matt. I'm looking forward to this session. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody, or whatever time it is, wherever you're watching at some distant point in the future. Good afternoon to those of you where it's afternoon now. I'm delighted to be able to introduce this keynote, but for those of you who are attending the conference live, first of all, I just wanted to share with you how much I've been enjoying the event, and I hope that's been the case for you too. One of the things that's really struck me is the feeling of a buzz and community at the event, and just shows what's possible online. There's a real feeling of togetherness, and a lot of the sessions I've been to have been really celebratory in terms of the work that's gone on over the last 18 months, or last 2 years even. So I just wanted to say that first and move on to the keynote now. This afternoon's keynote is, the topic is race and technology. And I know that it's a topic that's of great interest and, more importantly, of great importance to many people, and builds on work and presentations we've had before. And in particular, over the last year, the development within our community of an anti-racism and learning technology group, which now has, I think, over 100 members in a developing community of practice. So we're really fortunate this afternoon to have Mutale and Nkonde here with us today, who's now on the screen. Welcome, Mutale. Mutale is an expert in race and technology, and it's my great pleasure to introduce her to you now. Currently, Mutale is the founding director of AI for the People, which is a non-profit communication firm that uses journalism and art and culture to advance racial justice in technology. Mutale actually started her career in journalism here in the UK, I think, at the BBC, and also at CNN and ABC. And she now writes and talks frequently on race and technology, and has fellowships at Harvard, Stanford, and Notre Dame. Prior to doing the work she does now, Mutale worked in AI governance and was part of the team that introduced legislation in the States, including the 2019 Algorithmic Accountability Act. And moving on to today, amongst other things, Mutale currently sits on the TikTok Content Advisory Board, and I know that's something we'll be hearing a little more about soon. I'm going to stop talking now, and it's my great pleasure to hand over to Mutale, and I ask you to join me, the 1,000 emojis, in welcoming her to the stage.
Thank you so much, Matt. And so 2 things I'm going to say. I'm going to share my screen in a second. I know it looks really weird, but I don't know how to do this after 18 months. So thank you all in this community for putting us online. And I had always wanted to come back to the UK, having been in the States. And like Tracy Ullman did, the comedian, I used to watch her on the BBC, and I feel like the Black Tracy Ullman in this moment. So I'm very happy. So without further ado, I'm going to get onto the presentation. and then it's going to take me 30 to 35, maybe 40 minutes, and then we're going to come out and hopefully have a conversation. So can everybody see me? I can see nobody.
Yeah, all good.
Oh, perfect. So I can't see you, but you can see me, and that's going to be good enough. So I've done many things in my career over the last 10 years, but what's really bringing me to this conversation is a paper that I wrote in 2019 with my colleagues, Jesse Daniels, who is a sociologist at the City University of New York, and Darshan Mayer, who is a computer science professor at Bucknell. And what we were looking at that time were the way that the technologies that we were using, that we felt to be fair and accurate because, you know, they were made using maths, statistics. We didn't know anything about it. It had to be true. Still ended up making decisions that got us back to really the racist ideas of many say our past, but as somebody who has been Black all my life, the present. And we were really curious to why that was. So we connected with Howard Stevenson, who is a professor he's a psychology professor at the Graduate School of Education here at the University of Pennsylvania, which is very fancy Ivy League. And he introduced us to this idea of racial literacy as a framework. And I thought that was so perfect to bring to this audience because your community is really involved in learning, specifically learning with technology, but pedagogy is something that you folks are paying a lot of attention to. So as you can see, the racial literacy in tech framework has 3 distinct parts. The first is cognitive. So what do we think about technologies? As I motioned to in the beginning, when Darshan, Jesse, and myself were thinking about this idea of technology and race, we had come to the conclusion, we hadn't done any interviewing yet, that technologies were actually more than maths and physics, that the technologies that we were building were actually taking on meanings of race. And we were looking specifically at that point to the criminal justice system here in the United States. And we were noticing that the algorithms that were being used in sentencing would sentence Black defendants to longer sentences or less likely to get parole than white defendants who had the exact kind of same profile. So what was it about the technology that was picking up that white people were less likely to commit crime or recommit, whereas Black people were? And that was something that we had seen in the wider criminal justice system. We started to think about not just that question, but why weren't people outraged? You know, as a Black person that is coming from the social sciences, my first degree was at Leeds and I did sociology. Why was it that I could see this pattern really clearly? Jesse, my co-author, who's also a sociologist, could see this pattern very clearly, but our friends in engineering who are actually creating these technologies and developing these data sets had no idea. And it came down to one thing. We surveyed around 30 people for the paper, and we found that when we were speaking to these engineers, all of them were involved in the tech industry, working in Silicon Valley, and we were looking at everybody from VP of engineering to product manager, as well as people on the business side. But when we were looking at our data set of engineers, they actually feared talking about race. They were saying things like, you know, it makes me feel very uncomfortable. I don't want to be seen as racist. We got many responses about voting for President Obama. And what was really interesting about that was that wasn't an actual question on the survey, but it was being offered as kind of a way of, you know, avoiding getting into the conversation. I asked my white co-author to ask this conversation because I didn't, as a Black person, want to either get performative allyship or put people on the spot. But these were conversations between white people where they were saying, you know, these things, even questions that we were not asking. And then the third part of this framework is, what are we going to do about this? So we know that technologies, in this case, we were looking at the Compass algorithm, are really reproducing meanings of race and racism in our context. We know that the reason this isn't even being tackled is that there is no literacy around being able to talk about race, around being able to look at ourselves both as victims of white supremacy, because we're all swimming in the same sea, Black, white, Asian, whomever, it's the same system, as well as perpetrators of it, right? When we don't say anything, we then become complicit in allowing it to go on. And what were we going to do? And at that question really comes this idea of racial literacy in technology. And our call was for the development of learning systems within technology, both at in the academic sense, but even in industry as product teams are being created for a study of this, right? We knew that racism came in at the design stage through which inputs we were using, which questions we were asking, what we were optimizing. So embedding that within the design process, and this fear had to be let go. We are all people. We should not fear having honest conversations with each other. And we were successful and we weren't successful. We were really, really successful at getting people to go, oh, yeah, I get that. That's really good. We weren't very successful in design. So one of the ways that I advance this work is through advisory work that I do with TikTok, which is a social media platform built on Musical.ly, which was a dance platform bought by a Chinese company around 4 years ago now, and came to the United States and has gone across the world and kind of set the world on fire with dance videos. Very, very young usership. The majority of people on TikTok are actually between the ages of 12 and 24. So if you are on TikTok and not in that age range, you're old. And I was really interested in their algorithm because of the way Black young people were writing about it in the popular press. So this is a picture of their For You page. So if you sign on to the app, these are the kinds of things that you'll see. And the For You page really helps you see people or groups that are engaged in the types of videos you like. Standard social media practice. What drives this For You page is a series of algorithmic decision-making points. This is a model of how an algorithm, excuse me, I'm in Brooklyn, so we have to have some type of random car chase. Okay, they went past my window, so it isn't too bad. This is a model of what algorithmic decision-making can look like. So I'm not going to go through the whole model, but it might begin here. And the first prompt we're seeing is do it. For the sake of this conversation, the do it is going to be Mutale has signed on. What does Mutale like? So the algorithm will be trained to think about the sites that I go to, how long I stay there, if I comment, if I share, if I connect with the users in any way. That gives the training data needed to answer this first question. What do I do? The algorithm will then gain more knowledge. It will look for parallel pages that do and say and act in the way that are similar to the training data set. You see that arrow going up and down. It's then going to get really, really resourceful. In the universe of TikTok, Mutale doesn't know about X. Let's get this to X. And then I might start to interact with X that I didn't know about. And then it goes on and on and on. But at each of these decision points, what TikTok and all social algorithms are trying to do is to train and resource the algorithm to give me the content that's going to keep me on the platform. The reason that that's so important is the longer I stay on the platform, the more likely I am to be advertised to. I'm not suggesting that that's happening on TikTok. I actually don't know what their advertising model is. I'm very interested in the content, or to bring me, I guess, the next new dance craze. And this is This, unfortunately, can also be a site of how algorithmic racism happens. So I'm going to tell you a story of TikTok. It is a true story. And in it, I'm going to kind of talk you through the points at which this recommendation system that I've just described became racist. So to kind of just set you up, this is a young woman called Addison Rae. She's dancing to a song called Captain Hook by Megan Thee Stallion. Trigger warning for anybody who's live or anybody who's listening. There is some modicum of graphic content. It's describing an intimate act between a man and a femme identifying person. If that's something that you don't want to listen to, then this is a really good time to walk out the room, get a glass of water. It's going to last about 16 seconds, and then I'll be back.
Dance on the like you've been served. I like a dude with a little bit of curve. Hit this book with an uppercut. Call it Captain Hook. Ayy, I go shopping. Want it, then I cop it. Ayy, yeah. Popping. I do what they copy. Ayy, look, he's a sweetie. Kiss it when he ate it. Ayy, yeah.
Addison doing the dance. That's what TikTok does. That's why we love the platform. And that always happens. However, that dance was made up by a TikToker called Sydney Ray, who's on my right of the screen with the amazing pink eyeshadow and lashes. Sydney is a beauty influencer, but also really likes Megan Thee Stallion. At the time that I put this presentation together, which was about 2 weeks ago, she had 1.1 million followers. So that was mid-August for anybody that watches this later. And so she's less likely to appear on the For You page, because that first page that I showed you earlier in the presentation is really reserved for what they would call super influencers. So million followers is great, but these are people that might have 5 million or 10 million or 20 million. This is because the algorithm is optimized to promote the most popular pages. So remember when I was showing you the decision-making process of an algorithm? One of the things that the algorithm is going to be trained to do is to raise the pages that have the most followers. The logic being that pages that have lots of followers are the most popular on the platform and therefore going to keep people on the platform. And so we can advertise or make other strategic business decisions while we have people's attention. But what it doesn't think about is that Sydney is Black. And not only is she Black, she is a Black, what would be considered dark-skinned women. And researchers have found that Black women are deemed less desirable online, so they get fewer social media followers. So going back to the racial literacy framework, where we talk about this cognitive piece, that race is embedded in our technical systems, this is an example of how optimization for popularity ends up becoming a proxy for race because it doesn't allow for anti-Blackness in technology use. The study was reported in Nature magazine here in the United States in 2018, and based on dating profiles, but that logic still persists. However, Addison Rae did the dance. I did not show you Sydney doing the dance. Addison Rae has 70 million followers, so definitely firmly sits in that super user TikTok universe I was describing. She's very likely to appear on the For You page. In fact, I cannot discuss anything that's discussed in meetings, and we very rarely discuss individual TikTokers, but we do discuss these hyper influential accounts, whether they be politicians or people who are famous, or even people that really know how to capture the attention of the platform. And Addison Rae would definitely fall into that category. We actually saw content moderation decisions being made around this with Donald Trump on Twitter during the 2020 US election, where the decision was made that his account was so influential because he was the president of the United States that they would bring it down. So this is very standard across social media companies to really look at the types of messages that are being sent out by these super followers. Because the algorithm is optimized to promote the most popular pages without thinking about the social decision making, the social decisions in which popularity and desirability is decided online, she becomes one of the most popular people on TikTok. And so as people are coming onto their For You pages, they are seeing her latest content, including the video that I just shared with you. What does this mean? So unsurprisingly, Addison Rae is followed by filmmakers, television makers, record companies, and a record company sees the video that I just shown you. I'm sure it was longer than 16 seconds. She loves Megan Thee Stallion. She's always doing these dances. And she's given $7,000 to come in and teach TikTok dances to the staff of a record company as part of a promotion that they're doing, as well as getting a spot on the popular late night television show Jimmy Fallon. So Jimmy Fallon is a lot like, and now I'm blanking now that I'm speaking to you all, but the guy that does Carpool Karaoke, don't know why I'm blanking on his name. Love him, love him, love him. But it's a similar type of show. Comes on late at night, very funny, very topical. And as you can see from the sign, the man in the picture is Jimmy Fallon. The girl with the jeans is Addison Rae. He's holding up the sign Savage. Savage is another song by Megan Thee Stallion. And when it comes up, Addison switches to do this dance and she gets national recognition and attention. We love it. This type of recognition and attention leads to a whole plethora of opportunities, including going to commentate ringside at I think it was a wrestling match, and this Netflix movie. He's all about that. It is a Netflix movie about a young, hip girl in America that falls in love with a young, hip boy. It's a take on a movie that was done in the 90s, but the girl is in the driving seat instead of being picked. She's the picker, and this debuts at #1 at the beginning of September in the United States. So this is what this is how the algorithm and the recovering of Addison Rae is really benefiting her in her real life. When I looked up to see what all of these opportunities were amounting to, between the $7,000 that she got paid by the record company for one dance, the appearance on Jimmy Fallon, which I'm sure was for free, but gave this national platform, through to being cast in a Netflix movie, among other opportunities. She currently, September 2021, has an estimated net worth of around $5 million. And to put that into perspective, Solange, who is Beyonce's younger sister and has a #1 Grammy album, has the same type of estimated net worth. But I would argue a Grammy winner and having proximity to Beyonce is valuable, but guess what? So is being on TikTok. So let's look at what happened to Sydney. Sydney actually created the video. Remember, all Addison did was copy the dance that Sydney created. So Sydney gets paid $700 by the same record company to engage in the same promotion. Sydney created the dance. However, Sydney was not elevated to the For You page. Sydney was not discovered by Jimmy Fallon and given a national platform. Sydney was not cast in a Netflix movie that opened at #1, which means that she's more likely to be cast in more movies. Sydney got $700. That's around 950 pounds. And she taught Addison Rae how to add to her $5 million fortune. There's actually precedent for this. So this is a picture of a minstrel show. They were very popular during the Jim Crow era, which was the time just after the First World War, so around 1918. And it didn't stop until the Civil Rights Movement, which was in the 50s and 60s. The 60s, really, by the time we start getting legislation in 1964, 68, after Dr. Martin Luther King died. During this time, Black people were extremely lived in a segregated society. They weren't allowed to drink from water fountains, go to similar schools, have certain jobs, even make money for acting as Black people. But acting as Black people was a huge business. It was the minstrel business. And what minstrels did is that they looked at what Black people did in the same way that Addison looked at what Sydney did. They copied it and they got money. What I'm suggesting to you is, in the case study I'm giving you, the algorithm is acting like the minstrel, because the algorithm is what is raising Sydney's copycatting, I don't think that's even a verb, to national attention. In the picture, you can see that part of being a minstrel was that you would literally paint your face Black to appear Black, even though you were white. And this is called blackface. And you may see in the literature this idea of digital blackface. This is at the same time that Black actors and actresses cannot get roles in Hollywood or anywhere else for being Black. We can think of stars like Dorothy Dandridge, or even if we look to the life of Marilyn Monroe, we'll see that she was engaged in her own anti-racist activism, looking to performers like Bessie White, a jazz singer, and refusing to go to certain clubs unless they allowed Black female performers to sit with white people. So how does that racial literacy framework that I described earlier show up in this instance? TikTok's algorithm is expressing racism by using followers, by using popularity as a proxy for race. And the way that it becomes a proxy for race is that it's not really, it's not anticipating that what makes us popular online is mediated by race, by gender. Men are more popular online than women, by ability status. I've given you a case study where we're looking at two able-bodied people, but disabled dancers on TikTok do not get those types of followers. Generally, particularly those with physical disabilities, even though I do have to shout out Death Hottie, who is a TikToker who also does amazing dances to Megan Thee Stallion, but certainly is not at that level of Sydney Ray. So when we say that follower count is one of the optimization rates on TikTok, it happens across all platforms, we're also not being cognitive of how that becomes a proxy for race. Emotionally, Sydney and other white TikTokers who do the same, she is not the only one, were in outcry. It wasn't their fault that the algorithm favored them. They were just doing a dance. This is to do with the company. They're not racist, and they're correct. I don't know whether they're racist or not. Racism, as you know, because the work is being done in your community, is the process of policies and practices that oppress people on the grounds of race and actually makes their lives harder because of their race. So it's impossible to know through a screen, but we do know that they were very uncomfortable. That uncomfortability that I described with the engineers, they didn't want to discuss it. And from the Black perspective, people like Sydney Ray, who are watching Jimmy Fallon, as we all do. These are late night shows like James Corden. I remembered at the wrong time. Like James Corden, people that we all love. These are national treasures. Why wasn't that opportunity given to them? The question is simple. The show team were just looking for the most popular people on TikTok. They had no preference. not knowing that that's actually a racialized question. And the press was therefore full of outrage by Black creators. The action plan from a Black creator perspective was to stop posting videos. You can't steal what's not there. This chap on my left is saying in the far screen, made a dance for this song. Goes to the frame on my right, psych. This app will do nothing without Black people. So they stopped dancing. And then somebody comments, the way nobody knows what to do because we won't make dances for them. And then the letters are just described, like laughing my A off. And the rest. So they stopped. There was a strike. That strike is still ongoing, as far as I know. TikTok has a Black creators panel that was developed during the George Floyd uprisings that came across the globe, and looking for ways to make sure that the art of Black people on the platform isn't stolen, co-opted, and then commercialized by white creators. And so what they started to do with the algorithm, like I showed you the algorithm before, when dances are, when dances become really popular, when an Addison Rae or others do that dance, they actually do a split screen and show the person who originally developed the dance also. There are also new protocols where they're going to the original creator so that person can be raised. And this came about not just through the example that I'm showing you in the strike, but the New York Times did this huge expose on the Renegade dance, which is very similar to the one that I had shown you. And it was going on a similar trajectory, but because the Times did a profile of the actual originator, who happened to be, I think, a 14-year-old girl in Georgia, she started to get these opportunities. So it's not perfect, but it does show that racial literacy and technology, when taken on by a company, can actually be encoded into our systems. We can cognitively think about inputs that reduce racial harm, increase racial literacy, and make the output less anti-Black, right? Emotionally, we can all just admit that as human beings, we're creating these systems using machine learning. What machine learning does is use patterns of the past to predict the future. Because lots of people click onto Addison Rae, that means she's the most popular, without thinking of the way the platform itself has raised that, or even without thinking that the reason she's popular is because of this practice of co-opting. And in terms of an action plan, one of the things that I would definitely recommend to this and communities like it is that this becomes part of your decision-making matrix, whether it's that you're using technologies and you're really interested in their impact on minority groups along whichever line. I focus on anti-Blackness, but there are issues with accessibility. There are issues with depictions of women and feminized folks. If you are somebody who is trans or non-binary, the algorithm commits harm too. Those questions could be asked. Or even as you're designing systems, you're thinking about, how can we optimize for justice? How can we optimize for fairness? How can we make sure that in that learning process, we're asking questions that will make the lives of people like Sydney McRae and mine better, as opposed to just increasing the access and privilege of those like Addison Rae, who, by the way, I'm sure is a wonderful young woman, but was an incredible case study for the talk. So finally, before we get into conversation, I don't have my timer, so I don't know if I have over-talked or under-talked. My hope is that I have under-talked so that we can get into conversation. This really gets to the work I'm doing now. So this is how we make AI for the people. I sit on that content advisory board. I raise these questions. I'm in the company of people who have the emotional resilience to have these conversations. And I do that because as communicators, my ultimate professional background is in journalism, so I'm a professional communicator. But as communicators, we want to make these processes simple. We want to do it in a way that is entertaining and delightful and engaging, and in a way that allows us to speak about the harm of racism without falling into traps of fear, without falling into traps of guilt, but really leaning into the possibility of undoing a system that we ourselves created. And when I say we, I'm talking about society, because Black people and other non-white people certainly did not create the system of racism as we know it in the UK and the US, even though those power indifferences do exist in those populations. And then once we have figured out how we are going to create this new world, how do we share that news with everybody else? How do we recruit people of good conscience who want AI to be for all people, for the people? And I'm so looking forward to your questions and your conversation. And I'm hoping that next time you are looking at a video that seems entertaining, that seems to be getting traction, one of the questions that you're asking is, how was it created and what impact did this have on the creator?
Great. Oh, that took me by surprise, Mutale. That was a very quick finish. Thank you so much for opening that up to us and illuminating us. I mean, with examples from TikTok, which clearly resonated with some people from experience, but I'm sure were new to many of us too. We've got questions starting to come in. So the first one was actually around the example, and I'll just get it up on the screen for you now. But I'll read it. I'll read it out to you actually. But in the TikTok examples you were showing, or for TikTok's approach generally, what would you suggest they might do instead of popularity as a proxy? And is that a discussion I'm adding to that? Is that a discussion you've been involved in the Content Advisory Board or not?
Yeah, so with Content Advisory, we're really focused on making the platform safe. We're not so focused on the business model. So I'll just say that. And I think from a safety perspective, TikTok have done incredible work where September in the United States is Suicide Prevention Month. So one of the things that they're optimizing the algorithm to do is to show helpline numbers and to make sure that users have access to that information. They're not asking users if they're vulnerable, but they're just making that available. And I think that's a real pro-social way of using the For You page. I don't know that I don't know that there's a business plan. And at the end of the day, TikTok is a business. It is going to have to monetize. I'm not the best person to talk about social media just because I have a Twitter account because I have to for work, but I don't have any others just because I'm so concerned about the way that our data is used and how many proxies there are. I showed popularity, but area of where you live is often a proxy for race. Your name, I'm clearly not white. I'm Italian Nkonde, can be a proxy, and for gender as well. So without the business model, I would say put pro-social messages up. With the business model, I don't have much. Okay, no, don't worry. Thank you. Thank you very much for taking the question. I've got another one on the screen for you, on my screen for you, from Anu Roy, who works actually here at the University of the Arts London. And it's on the screen now. I will keep quiet while you read it. Well, first of all, this is probably the point that I say AI for the People is going to be coming to the University of Arts London. We got an invitation. So Anu, it's really nice to meet you. And, I consider you, Matt, and everybody else there colleagues, even if it's for a small part. This is really interesting. So I'll talk about TikTok because that's the example I know. TikTok were actually really proactive around making sure that creators of color were supported, which is why they did that split screen. Like when they realized a dance was trending, there's a certain threshold, they would then go and look for the first time that that video appeared on the platform and make sure that people knew. And the reason that TikTok did that is that they're a dance platform. And they want to be a place for fun. They want to be, really young kids are on there. They don't want to get into any type of politics. That's kind of their view. And I was really pleased with that. However, these types of situations happen across platforms. So you'll see attacking of Black women on Twitter, which is a huge historic thing. And not much work has been done there, even though I am hearing whispers that, Black Twitter and the protection of Black Twitter in the US is going to become an increasing priority. We all know that, Facebook is where information goes to die. They all do, but those Facebook groups do a woozy. And often that's racialized. And that's across the globe, whether we're looking at, Hindu nationalists using Facebook to do terrible things and to non-Hindus in India. I personally think, and this is what we were saying with the Algorithmic Accountability Act, that platforms are going to make money. That's what they're supposed to do. Their job is to increase shareholder value. And if they can hold people by doing this, they're going to continue. So government has to step in. And what we were proposing is that if a platform is found to harm a minority community, the algorithm would not be allowed to be marketed. Because right now it's a free-for-all. I could write code, Matt and I could write code today. It could do all kinds of harm and there would be nothing stopping us.
Thank you. And thanks, Mutale, and thanks for coming on to the legislation, actually, because I had a question in mind for that. However, I've got more questions, two lined up in the chat for you now. So the first one comes from Pete Meller, and we'll just get it on the screen for you now.
Oh my goodness. So Pete is asking about AI tools for education. And the thing I love about this question, Pete, I believe that we are kindred spirits. The word touted is used. So all AI systems, as we're designing them now, if we are using machine learning, and what that means is that we just look at, we look at historical behavior, and then we use them to predict the future or shape the future, are going to have bias. The best example, and I did speak about it a little, is the Compass algorithm, where judges were using it as part of their sentencing determination. And the way that that algorithm was trained is that it was looking at historic sentencing determinations made by judges for those crimes, with the assumption that the judges themselves weren't racist, that weren't prejudiced. And what it found was a pattern of judges either giving Black people longer sentences, sentencing Black people when they didn't sentence white people, or refusing parole. And that became part of how the algorithm learned. Education is a hugely racialized field. We know. I grew up in the UK. I thankfully got an absolutely amazing education from nursery school, primary school, and then I went to high school. I actually didn't do the middle. I went to middle school, I think, for 1 year. Then I went to high school because it went from when I was 11 to GCSE and beyond. I got an amazing education because I come from, my parents are both doctors. So I had class privilege. I also had two doctor parents who were like, you can do physics. We're Black and we do physics. You're going to be Black and do physics. Not everybody came from that. So in my school, if you looked at the educational data, you would think that Black kids are thick. You would think that Black kids can't do this and can't do the other. And those AI tools for education are taking in all of that data. They're looking at exam results, they're looking at attendance, and they're not looking at the full life of a Black student. So I would definitely think that they have these biases. And my advice is use the AI tool as a tool. Don't use it to make determinations. If it's telling you, like we saw with the A-level algorithm, that if you go to a state school, that you're going to get lower AI lower exam results than if you went to Eton, and we all know Boris Johnson went to Eton, then you don't believe that, right? You have to look at the actual student, look at that student's performance, look at that student's progression. And my view would be, look at their social life, look at the environment they're coming from, and make a determination and throw out the AI tool if it's being racist, sexist, homophobic, and all the other isms.
Great, thank you. Thank you. It's such a big area for many of us here at the moment in terms of how people are interpreting data from these big systems. The next question I've got, oh blimey, is also from a colleague here in London. So I'm just going to get Dave White's question up on the screen.
So Dave is asking me the relationship between human-led moderation and curation and algorithmic approaches. Power and privilege, Dave. So most human-led moderation is done in what we call the global south, specifically places like the Philippines, where you have people who are contractors to the companies working in call center type environments, and they're making these decisions on videos. The issue that you have around that is they may not have local context. So even in the Captain Hook video, there's a line in the video where she talks about eating groceries, and it's actually not food. It's reference to a sexual act that if you're a black teenager, white teenager in America, you might know that. But if you live in the Philippines and you're trying to figure out whether the lyrics are whether a 3-year-old could listen to the lyrics, you might hear Captain Hook. Oh, yeah, that's some Peter Pan. That's great. Groceries. Oh, okay. That could be, some cheese. And what she's actually describing is very sexual in nature. So you get mismoderation a lot where there's no context. Where there's algorithmic moderation, you miss in other ways, because algorithmic moderation has to come to a certain threshold. So I was trolled really badly this summer for being a co-author on a paper. And even though I was showing, this was on Twitter, I was, blessed to be in conversation, or privileged, I should say, in conversation with Twitter. But because the abuse didn't meet the threshold and they hadn't been trained in African-American vernacular, I didn't get any relief. So I think that there's somewhere in between the two where you can use the algorithm to show great patterns. I think they're really, really good for big, reading things that we would never be able to read in our lives. And you would need human moderation, but you would need moderators who actually understood the context. And in global companies, you might not want someone from the Philippines or Darfur or any other part of the world moderating content from outside their context, because things could get missed.
Okay, thanks, Mutale. We're going to take just one more question from Roger, which we'll put up on the screen now, and then we'll start to think about winding things up. Maybe time for one more if anybody's got one. Okay.
Oh, how do we help? How do we guide our children? Oh, 8-year-olds on TikTok, that scares me. 8-year-olds on TikTok, because they really are too young for critical thought. 8-year-old TikTok is not optimized to be a platform for anyone under 12, even though I have a 13-year-old whose frontal lobe is coming nowhere soon. And so I worry about his TikTok use, to be honest. I think they're increasing parental controls on the platform, but if you can, and I don't have, my youngest child is 13, so I don't have an 8-year-old. I do not know what 8-year-olds are doing. If you can, social media is not necessarily the safest place, just because so many hidden messages are embedded. And from an advertising perspective, you don't want your children advertised in a way where often advertisers will create community with people. Like I remember when I was pregnant, getting into a mummy's Facebook group, and I didn't realize I was being advertised to the whole time. But because I had so many questions, I was in a very vulnerable position, I ended up being really victim to that. And I think that children are in a similar situation. Parental controls, if you can get them, definitely limit though. Definitely limit. I think, in the content advisory board, we have so many youth experts who come in and look at content, but youth is not as young as 8. It tends to be teenage. They do have children's experts, but that's not what the platform is optimized for. Okay.
Thanks, Mutale. There are lots of questions coming in, so if it's okay with you, I'm going to throw a couple more at you.
Yeah, I'm here till I'm not.
Okay, fantastic. A question from Tim coming in next. We'll just get that up on the screen.
Tim asked some really great questions. Would human in the loop do something to mitigate this effect? Absolutely. I think AI is an incredible tool. It's incredibly powerful. We should definitely be using it. I believe in AI for the people. I'm not saying get rid of AI. I think that would be an incredible mistake, but we can't rely on it. We can't give up decision-making to systems that don't understand social context. An example I always give is one here in Chicago, where the Children's Services division, that they do all the at-risk children work. So they're protecting those kids, gave over decision-making power to an algorithmic system. And what ended up happening is that it increased caseloads of social workers, and they ended up being so overwhelmed with cases that more at-risk children died because they had been fed all of these new leads that amounted to nothing. And again, it was on racial grounds. So more Black children were identified as being at risk, and then white at-risk children died. And the state of Illinois ended up having to get rid of the algorithm. Whereas I think if there had been a human being, they could have looked more into the history of those cases. They could have been, we need discernment. Decision-making includes discernment, and algorithms cannot be trained to provide that.
Okay, thank you. More questions coming in. Any optimism on AI?
Yes, I think for mitigating climate, AI systems have the ability to help us, first of all, pattern. I'm thinking of agriculture specifically. So agricultural practices add 10% of all the greenhouse gases that we have in the globe. And one of the things that I'm seeing in the ag tech sector are the development of AI tools that can help optimize farming practices to stop things like nitrogen fertilizer use. Not stop it, but reduce it. Once we reduce it, we also are reducing the production of nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas. We would not be able to do thermal imaging. We would not be able to process that data and make it usable without using AI systems. And given that we need a world to live in, I am so optimistic about what can be done in that area. And I just hope those scientists get funding. And it's not human subjects, right? We're dealing with soil. So a lot of the problems I talk about are when we're using AI in relation to human beings.
Great. That's fascinating. Fascinating. I'm going to take one more, which I missed earlier, from Sheila. We'll get that up on the screen, and I'm sure Sheila's not being daft, but I'll leave that one with you.
Oh my goodness, Sheila, another, I feel like, sister from another mister, for sure. She's asking, can algorithms be more explicit? Is there a way to make them public, like food labeling? Am I just being daft? No, you're not. So algorithms are protected by either IP, so intellectual property, or trade secrets. What that means is that when a company develops an AI system, they say, no, this is our secret sauce. This is what makes us proprietary. This is what makes us make money. if we release the source code to the algorithm, then everybody's going to be able to do this and we won't have a business. So that means that we don't even know how they work. When I talked about the report at the beginning, we have to do ethnographic and other qualitative work to identify patterns, but we cannot tell you exactly that system that I described. And one of the things that we looked at in the Algorithmic Accountability Act was a way of allowing business to have their trade secrets. Why? So that they can be in business. I live in the United States. That's, capitalism 101. While at the same time making sure these things are safe, because we actually do have that when we think about the COVID vaccine and how it had to go through trials and it had to go through tests and it couldn't be. I mean, that's a bad example in some ways because they got emergency clearance, but there is a process because these things are being used on human beings. But what I think we can do as informed citizens is we can demand that. We can say to our politicians, we can say to our regulators that these technologies are too dangerous. They are making us racist by proxy, right? You can't be blamed for the racist decision-making of source code that you have no access to. But if you use it, you're definitely part of the problem. And we want a different future for ourselves. And so that's a lot of the media work that we do, even the work that we're coming to do at University College London, is really around how do we increase the civic voice around this? How do we expand the civic imagination and let us know that the technical systems that we use are as much as our concern as airways and rivers and the houses that we live in.
Great, thank you so much, Mutale. There are more questions, but I'm actually going to have to draw a line under it now, unfortunately, because there's a big gala and television program launch at 5 o'clock, and I'd be in a lot of trouble if we ran into that. So on behalf of everybody here, a huge thank you for today. A fascinating talk, and it's clearly been very popular. We'll show you the chat afterwards, and you can browse through that. But I'm sure everybody will now join me in the way we have to thank you through emojis for your talk today. And we look forward to seeing you in London or in the UK at some point. Thanks, Mutale.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.